I know it's not a really sexy topic, but I think having a good grasp of your finances is really important, especially if you want to run a successful business. So in this video, we'll create a very simple but effective income and expenditure report using Notion. We can do it without even using formulas, so it's going to be super easy to follow. If you're not familiar with the application, I would suggest watching my overview video about Notion. You can either click on the title card here or find it in the description below. In short, Notion is a productivity tool that allows us to build many different things with it, from simple watch lists to full-on project tracking. To create our income and expenditure report, we'll use Notion's database feature. With databases, we can inject into our transactions all the data points we might need, which in turn will allow us to look at our finances in all sorts of different ways. We'll be able to see how much we've earned per project or per client, filter our finances by month or year. You get the point. So, let's get started. Let's create a new page, and from the presets, let's pick the database option. We only need 5 columns to build our report. The first column is going to describe the transaction. For example, the name of the project we worked on or what we spend our money on. Let's add a dummy project. Let's say it's a shoe scan for Nike. The second column is going to describe the client or the project type. So for our shoe scan example, we will put down Nike's name. If we have a more unconventional income, like earning money from AdSense, this is where we would add YouTube's name. We can have this column either as a multi-select or a single select column. The select option allows us to only select one tag at a time, and multi-select allows us to pick more than one. But in this case, I would say single select is the best option. Now for the next 2 columns, we can approach tracking of income and expenses in different ways. Let's go with a simple one first, and then I'll show you a slightly more complex way of doing things. In the end, you can pick the method you like the most. So let's add a number column and call it in and out. And let's also give it a currency option. Depending on the type of transaction, this field will track either an income or an expense. Let's say that our 3D scan for Nike earned us 2,900 euros. But we also needed some extra equipment to complete the project. So let's add one more row and type turntable as a description. The project type is still Nike, and the turntable cost us 200 euros. Perfect. It's worth mentioning that these transactions are pages, so we can add there any extra information we might want. For example, if we want to add the receipt for the turntable, we can just open up the turntables page and paste it there. Simple as that. Now let's add a column that will make it easier for us to filter for the type of transaction, income or expense. Let's add a select column and call it type. The shoe scanning row is an income, and the turntable is an expense. Now let's give the tag some better colors so it's easier to see at a glance whether something is an income or an expense. Let's do green for income and red for expenses. Now the last column we need is going to track the transaction date. So let's add a date column and call it transaction date. Let's do October 4 for the turntable and October 13 for the income transaction. And with that, we're all set. We have all the elements we need. Now let's see how we can make everything work. I'm going to move the in and out column at the end of the table, and now let's add everything up. We have this calculate option at the bottom of the table, so let's use it to calculate all of our transactions. We have a lot of different options to choose from, but the one we need is the sum. As you can see though, the result is not correct since the 200 euros is an expense. We just have to add a minus next to the amount, and now everything is properly calculated. The only thing we have to do now is add some sorting options so our transactions show up in order, and of course have some more ways to view our data so we can filter for different things like clients, months, years, etc. Let's add a few more dummy transactions so we have some more data to play with. For expenses, I don't do any extra tracking, so the type field stays empty. But if you want to, you can add this information here, or you can create a new column and call it expense type or something like that. The first thing we need to fix is the transaction date column. The dates are all over the place. We have some November dates after December or 2022 dates before 2021. We can fix that very easily by sorting our transactions by date. We'll go to the sorting option here and pick transaction date as the way of sorting. We'll also do ascending, so now the later dates show up at the bottom and the earlier dates at the top. Excellent. Now let's create a monthly view. It's going to be a table view again, and let's call it monthly view. I'll rename the default view to bird's eye view. I want to keep this because it's going to display things in the simplest way possible, so it's handy to have. Now let's go back to the monthly view and set things up. Let's add the sum option at the end of the table, sort by date, and now the monthly grouping will happen with this handy little option, group by transaction date, and then by month. Awesome! Now our transactions are grouped exactly how we want. We can also hide this no transaction group by going back to the group option and enabling the hiding empty groups toggle. Now let's do a yearly view. Let's duplicate this view, rename it, and we just need to group things differently. We'll use a filter and say show us only the dates after January 1st, 2021 and before January 1st, 2022. So now only the transactions that happened in 2021 will show up. Let's also group things a little bit differently. So instead of grouping by month, let's group things by the type of transactions. So now we have one group for our income transactions and one group for our expenses. As you can see, there's so much flexibility. We can display and group things in all sorts of ways. If, for example, we want to view our income by client, we can easily do that. So let's check out how we can display only YouTube earnings. We can either search for YouTube and only the YouTube related transactions will show up, or we can create a separate view. Let's do that. Let's duplicate this view, call it YouTube Overview, and now all we need to do is add one more filter which will display only YouTube related transactions. We didn't have any expenses, but if we had some, these would show up here as well. So it's easy to track how much money is coming in versus what's being spent. It's super easy to create these type of income and expenditure reports in Notion. It's just grouping and sorting things in different ways. The more data we have for our transactions, the more ways we can view that data. Now, before we finish up, let me show you a slightly more complex way to track things. This will involve the formula option, but don't worry, it's nothing too complex. So instead of having one column that tracks both income and expenses, we will split them into two columns, one for income and one for expenses, and then have a formula that will calculate the difference between the two. You'll see why I prefer this option, but both are valid, so in the end you can pick the one you like the most. Let's add a number column, give it a currency, and call it in. This is where we will add all the income. Now let's create another number column, give it a currency again, and call it out. This is for our expenses. Perfect. Now let's get rid of the in and out column so it won't confuse us. We don't need it anymore. I'm going to move these next to the project type, and now let's see how we can do the calculations we need. We basically want to subtract the out value from the in value and get the result from these two. So let's create a formula column and call it in and out result. A formula allows us to do all sorts of things, add two values together, check if a condition is met, and so on and so forth. In our case, we just need a simple subtraction, so our formula is gonna go like this. We want property in minus property out, and that's it. That's how simple it is. Now we can use the sum option at the bottom of the table to calculate the total of our transactions. This method has two benefits. We won't have to use the minus symbol every time we add an expense, and it's also a lot easier to visually distinguish between income and expense because now these two transactions are two separate columns. As I mentioned though, whatever you choose is perfectly fine. That's the beauty of Notion. It doesn't force you to work a specific way. It just molds into how you want to work. And that's it. We now have an awesome way to track our income and expenses. These reports though are only part of the equation. In future videos we will also discuss different solutions for budgeting. Why do we need budgeting, you might ask? It's really simple. The reports we produce in Notion are great, but they just track the outcome. But we also want to be proactive and have a way to control beforehand where our money goes. And this is where budgeting comes into play. But let's do that in a separate video. For now, let me know in the comments if you have any questions about the reports or if something's not clear. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.